You open your eyes and the air smells like coal smoke and fresh paint. Your hands are cold. Your heart is not. Somehow you are standing on the deck of a ship that sank over a century ago, and you already know what happens next. You know the date. You know the time. You know the iceberg is out there, waiting in the dark water like it has been waiting your whole life for this moment. So you do the only thing that makes sense. You start running toward the bridge to warn someone. But here is the part nobody prepares you for. Warning people is easy. Being believed is not. You find an officer near the forward deck. You tell him an iceberg will strike the starboard bow in exactly 2 hours and 40 minutes. He looks at you the way people look at a stranger who talks to pigeons. Polite, distant, already walking away. This is not because he is careless. It is because your brain, and every brain around you, is running on a piece of software installed long before ships existed. Psychologists call it normalcy bias. It is the quiet assumption that tomorrow will resemble today, simply because it always has. The ship is the largest, safest vessel ever built. Nothing about that story includes you. You try again. You find a wealthy passenger, someone with influence, someone who might get a message to the captain faster than you can. You tell her exactly what will happen. The list, the lifeboats, the number 1,500. She smiles the way people smile at a fortune teller at a carnival. Interesting, unbelievable. Not now. Have you ever tried to convince someone of something true, only to watch the truth slide right off them like rain off glass? This is where the trip stops feeling like an adventure and starts feeling like a study in human behavior. Because saving the Titanic was never really about the iceberg. It was about the 11,000 small decisions made by tired, confident, hierarchical people, none of whom wanted to be the one who overreacted. Consider the wireless room. Iceberg warnings were already coming in from nearby ships that night. More than one of them. Some never made it to the bridge. One arrival was cut short because the operator was mid-message with paying customers, sending personal telegrams back to shore, and the incoming ice warning got pushed to the bottom of the pile. Not because anyone was foolish, because everyone was busy, and busy people triage information the way a body triages blood in a crisis, sending it to the loudest wound first. The iceberg warning was not loud yet. You decide to go straight to the captain. Edward Smith. A man with over 40 years at sea, a reputation as calm and unshakable as the ship beneath him. You tell him everything, the exact time. The lifeboat shortage. The name people will use for this disaster for the next 100 years. He listens. He is not cruel and he is not stupid. But he has crossed the Atlantic dozens of times without incident, and confidence built from repetition is one of the strongest forces in the human mind. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent much of his career studying this exact pattern, showing that people consistently overestimate how much control experience gives them over rare, high-stakes events. Captain Smith is not ignoring you. He is doing what decades of success trained him to do, trusting the pattern. Here is where it gets stranger. Even if he believed you completely, even if he ordered the ship to slow down immediately, there is another problem waiting, one that has nothing to do with belief and everything to do with time. The ship weighs over 46,000 tons. Turning it, slowing it, changing its fate, takes minutes, not seconds. You cannot simply decide to avoid a disaster. You have to outturn physics itself, and physics does not care how sincere your warning was. So you shift strategy. Forget convincing the captain. Go straight to the lifeboats. This is where the story gets almost unbearably human. There were enough lifeboats to legally satisfy outdated maritime regulations, but nowhere near enough to hold everyone on board. And even the boats that existed were lowered half empty in the early confusion, because passengers did not believe the situation was real yet. Why would you climb into a small, cold, swaying boat, leaving the warm-lit, orchestra-playing deck of the largest ship in the world, unless you were certain the danger was worse than the discomfort? This is the same psychological wall studied by researcher John Leach, who spent decades examining how humans behave in the opening seconds of a genuine crisis. His findings are almost eerie in how consistent they are across disasters. A significant portion of people do not panic when catastrophe strikes. They freeze, not from cowardice. From a kind of mental short circuit, the brain waiting one extra beat for more information before committing to a response that cannot be taken back. On the Titanic, that one extra beat cost hundreds of lives because the ship only gave people about 2 hours before the freezing water outside became the only alternative left. You start pulling people toward boats yourself, physically, insistently. And it works, a little. A few people follow you, mostly out of confusion rather than conviction. But something else begins working against you now. Something with a name. Groupthink. First described in detail by psychologist Irving Janis, groupthink is what happens when a group under pressure begins prioritizing agreement and harmony over accurate assessment of a threat. Nobody wants to be the first person sprinting for a lifeboat while the band is still playing and the deck lights are still glowing gold across the black water. Nobody wants to be wrong in front of everyone. So the group waits, together, calmly, right up until waiting is no longer an option. You think of one more option. A ship called the Californian is somewhere nearby that night, close enough that its lights are visible from the deck. If you could reach the wireless room, you could send a message clear enough that no one could misread it. You climb toward the radio room, past passengers still laughing over cards, past a string quartet tuning their instruments for an evening performance they believe will happen exactly as planned. Inside, the wireless operator is exhausted, buried under a backlog of personal messages from first-class passengers, eager to boast to friends on shore about the maiden voyage. You tell him to stop everything and send an emergency signal. He hesitates, not out of malice, but because his entire evening has trained him to treat this moment as ordinary. Later, historians will note that a nearby ship's radio operator had already gone to bed for the night, and a single earlier message meant to warn of exactly this ice field was cut off mid-sentence by a busy wireless room drowning in birthday wishes and stock updates. You are standing inside that exact bottleneck, watching urgency lose to routine in real time. You go back out onto the deck, and the hierarchy of the ship becomes impossible to ignore. This was never only a psychological story, it was a structural one. The layout of the ship itself determines who hears the warnings first and who reaches the boats fastest. Corridors, locked gates meant to satisfy immigration inspections, staircases built for one class rather than all of them, quietly shape who has a real chance and who is left navigating unfamiliar passageways in the dark. You start shouting directions, describing shortcuts you should not know, guiding people through hallways as if you have walked them 1,000 times. A few follow. Most hesitate, because a stranger giving confident directions in the middle of a controlled, orderly evening is stranger than the iceberg itself. By now the ship has struck. Not violently, not in the way movies show it, but with a long, almost gentle scraping sound. More unsettling because of how undramatic it feels. This is the last moment where your warning could have mattered. And it is already too late. What happens next is the part that stays with you. Officers begin loading boats they don't yet believe are necessary, at a speed dictated by a crowd that doesn't yet believe evacuation is real. On a ship that everyone was told was unsinkable, using systems designed by a culture that assumed disaster was something that happened to smaller, less impressive vessels. You watch the specific psychology of denial play out in slow motion. Not fiction. Documented history. You cannot fix all of it, but you save who you can. You get families into boats before the lines grow long enough to feel hopeless. You physically block someone from going back for luggage. You are one person against thousands of years of instinct telling humans that things which have always worked will keep working, right up until the moment they don't. And here's the strange twist your time travel reveals, the one no simple retelling of the disaster ever quite captures. The Titanic did not sink because people were foolish. It sank because people were exactly as rational, cautious, hierarchical, and socially careful as humans always are, placed inside a system that had no tolerance left for that kind of caution. Every individual decision, taken alone, looked reasonable. Wait for confirmation. Trust the experts. Don't cause a panic. Follow the chain of command. Stacked together in the dark over 2 hours, those same reasonable instincts built a disaster. Is that not the strangest part of the whole story? That you did not need villains. You did not need a single cruel or reckless decision. You needed only ordinary human psychology, operating exactly as it always does, running headfirst into a situation it was never designed for. Somewhere in the final hour, you stop trying to convince the whole ship and start focusing on the few people directly in front of you. A mother struggling with two children and no clear direction. An older man quietly stepping back from a boat to let a stranger's family take his place. A small, uncelebrated act of decency that no headline will ever record. A teenage crew member freezing at his post, uncertain whether following protocol or breaking it, is the braver choice. None of these moments make it into the famous version of this story, the one about a doomed, unsinkable ship. But they are the real texture of the night. Thousands of tiny human decisions made by people who were neither heroes nor villains. Simply people, doing their best with the information, the training, and the 30 seconds they had. You return to your own time changed, not because you rewrote history, but because you finally understand why history unfolded the way it did. Tonight, when your phone buzzes with a warning you don't quite believe, a weather alert, a system update urging you to act now, a friend telling you something feels wrong, notice the small, familiar voice in your head that says, "Surely this is fine. Surely someone else has already handled it. Surely this is not really an emergency." That voice is not new. It is not weak. It is ancient, patient. And it has been steering humans since long before any ship ever left port. You did not travel back in time to save the Titanic. You traveled back in time to meet the same mind you already carry, wearing a different coat, standing on a different deck, waiting for you to notice it before the water gets too high.